In the beginning, before history was written, the land of Greece was shaped by mountains, seas, and endless skies. It was here that myths, not chronicles, told the story of origins. The Greeks believed that out of a great void called chaos, the world emerged. From chaos came earth, sky, sea, and darkness. Then arose the mighty beings known as the Titans. Among them was Cronus, who overthrew his own father Uranus and ruled the heavens. But prophecy whispered that one of Cronus's children would rise against him. In fear, Cronus swallowed each child as they were born. Yet his wife, Rhea, hid the youngest, Zeus, and tricked Cronus with a stone. Zeus grew in secret, strong and unyielding. One day, he challenged his father and freed his swallowed siblings. A great war followed, the Titanomachy, where gods and titans clashed. In the end, Zeus and his allies triumphed. The Titans were cast into the depths of Tartarus. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades divided the world, sky, sea, and underworld. Now the Olympian gods reigned, not as distant forces, but as beings who loved, envied, and quarreled like mortals. Their stories reflected human hopes and flaws. Mount Olympus became the seat of divine power. And in every valley, island, and shore, myths wove themselves into daily life. Greece was a land divided by mountains, but united by the sea. Isolation created independent city-states, while the waters carried trade, war, and culture. Thus, the identity of Greece was born, competitive, creative, and restless. The age of myth slowly prepared the way for the age of history. And in this dawn, Greece stepped into the world, half legend, half truth. In the time after the gods claimed Olympus, there came an age unlike any other. It was the age of heroes, when mortals rose to greatness, aided and hindered by the gods themselves. This age was filled with stories of valor, betrayal, love, and destiny. The greatest of these tales would be remembered in the epic cycle of Greece. At the heart of it all was the city of Troy, standing proud upon the coast of Asia Minor. Troy was strong, with high walls said to be built by the gods themselves. Its king, Priam, ruled with wisdom, yet his fate was tied to tragedy. The spark of destiny came with a single event, the judgment of Paris. Paris, son of Priam, was chosen to decide who among the goddesses, Hera, Athena, or Aphrodite, was fairest. Each goddess offered him a gift, power, wisdom, or love. Paris, swayed by desire, chose Aphrodite, who promised him the most beautiful woman in the world. That woman was Helen, queen of Sparta, wife of King Menelaus. When Paris stole Helen away to Troy, he set the world aflame. The kings of Greece, bound by oaths of honor, rallied to retrieve her. So began the gathering of heroes: Agamemnon, Menelaus, Odysseus, Achilles, Ajax, Diomedes, and many more. Their fleets crossed the Aegean, black sails covering the horizon. The Trojan War had begun, a conflict destined to last 10 years. The gods themselves took sides, Hera, Athena, and Poseidon aiding the Greeks, while Aphrodite, Ares, and Apollo stood by the Trojans. Upon the plain of Troy, battles raged endlessly. The greatest warrior of the Greeks was Achilles, swift and nearly invincible. His wrath and glory shaped the course of war. Yet even heroes were bound by fate. Achilles clashed with Hector, Prince of Troy, the city's greatest defender. In single combat, the two met, while gods watched in silence. Hector fell, and Troy mourned its most noble son. But victory for the Greeks did not come quickly. Years dragged on, with both sides suffering loss and despair. The war was not won by strength of arms alone, but by cunning. Here entered Odysseus, the wily king of Ithaca, whose mind was sharper than any sword. He devised a plan to end the war, a gift that would conceal doom. The Greeks built a giant wooden horse, hollow within, and pretended to retreat. The Trojans, believing it an offering to the gods, brought the horse into their city. But in the dead of night, Greek warriors hidden inside emerged. They opened the gates, and the Greek army returned under cover of darkness. Troy was engulfed in fire and ruin. The proud city that had withstood a decade of siege fell in a single night. Priam was slain, Hector's infant son thrown from the walls, and the women of Troy carried away as captives. Thus ended the Trojan War, but the age of heroes did not fade so swiftly. For every hero carried his own fate, and the return home was as perilous as the war itself. The Greeks called it the nostoi, the tales of return. Odysseus wandered for 10 long years, facing storms, monsters, and temptations before reaching Ithaca. Agamemnon returned to betrayal and death at the hands of his own wife. Menelaus wandered far only to reunite with Helen at last. The war had ended, but Greece itself was forever changed. The stories of Troy were told and retold, finally woven into the epics of Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. In those verses, the age of heroes lived on, a bridge between myth and history. The people of Greece saw in these heroes not only gods and kings, but reflections of themselves, flawed, yearning, and mortal. The legends became lessons, guiding generations with tales of courage, pride, and the tragic cost of glory. And so, the age of heroes passed, leaving behind immortal stories that still echo through time. After the age of heroes faded into memory, Greece entered a new chapter. This was the birth of the polis, the rise of the city-state, a form of community unlike any seen before. The word polis meant more than a city. It was a union of people, land, and identity, bound together by shared laws and traditions. Each polis was a world of its own, small yet powerful, with its own gods, customs, and ambitions. Together, these city-states created the foundation of Greek civilization. The land of Greece, rugged and mountainous, made great kingdoms difficult to sustain. Instead of one empire, valleys and islands gave rise to many independent centers. Each polis was fiercely proud of its freedom, yet constantly in rivalry with its neighbors. Among them, two cities would shine brightest: Athens and Sparta. Athens, set near the sea, was open to trade, ideas, and the arts. The Athenians built ships, welcomed foreigners, and debated laws in open assemblies. They prized freedom, intellect, and creativity, shaping a city alive with discussion and imagination. Sparta, by contrast, was inland, disciplined, and austere. The Spartans lived not for trade or philosophy, but for strength and survival. Every citizen was trained from youth for war, their lives devoted to the defense of the state. While Athens grew in culture, Sparta grew in military power. The contrast between these two poles defined much of Greek history. Yet, beyond Athens and Sparta, countless other polis thrived. Corinth, with its wealth from trade routes. Thebes, proud and ambitious, often challenging its rivals. Delphi, home of the sacred oracle, where kings and generals sought the voice of Apollo. Each polis had its own identity, but they shared a common spirit of competition and excellence. This spirit was most clearly seen in the Olympic Games. Every 4 years, city-states set aside wars and rivalries to honor Zeus at Olympia. Athletes competed for glory, not wealth, for to be crowned with the olive wreath was the greatest prize of all. The polis was not only about war and games, but about laws and governance. In Athens, the seeds of democracy began to grow. Citizens gathered in the ecclesia, debating issues of war, trade, and justice. Although not everyone had a voice, women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded, the idea that free men could govern themselves was revolutionary. Philosophers and poets flourished, questioning the nature of justice, truth, and beauty. In Sparta, governance was shared between two kings, a council of elders, and an assembly of warriors. Spartan society valued equality among its citizens, but only those who endured the strict life of training from childhood. It was a system designed not for innovation, but for survival. Together, these differing visions of the polis created a balance in Greece. Athens embodied freedom, creativity, and progress. Sparta embodied discipline, order, and strength. Neither could exist without the other, for Greece was shaped by both the pen and the sword. As the centuries passed, the polis became the heart of Greek identity. Citizens would die for their city, fight for its honor, and dedicate their lives to its survival. The rise of the polis transformed Greece from scattered tribes into a civilization of immense influence. In every marketplace, in every temple, in every council hall, the voices of free men echoed across the land. The city-state became not only a political system, but a way of life, a mirror of the human spirit, striving for excellence, independence, and belonging. This was the world that would give birth to philosophy, art, science, and the great conflicts yet to come. The story of Greece had entered a new age, and the stage was set for triumphs and tragedies that would echo through eternity. Among all the Greek city-states, none stood as unique or as disciplined as Sparta. While Athens grew with trade, debate, and art, Sparta built itself upon silence, strength, and steel. Nestled in the fertile valley of the Eurotas River, surrounded by mountains, Sparta seemed protected by nature itself. But its people believed survival required more than walls. It required warriors. From birth, every Spartan child belonged not only to a family, but to the state. If a newborn was weak or sickly, elders could decree its fate, for Sparta allowed only the strong to live. This harsh beginning set the tone for the life of discipline that every Spartan would endure. At the age of 7, boys were taken from their families and enrolled in the agage, the rigorous training system. Here, they learned obedience, endurance, and the art of war. Their lives were stripped of comfort, simple meals, hard beds, and endless exercise forged them into soldiers. Pain was a teacher, silence a virtue, and courage the only currency of worth. Even theft was encouraged, not for greed, but to teach cunning and survival. If caught, the punishment was not for stealing, but for failing to be clever enough. Spartan education was not about philosophy or poetry. It was about loyalty to the state and mastery of the spear. By adulthood, a Spartan man was expected to be ready for war at all times. They lived in barracks, ate at common mess halls, and trained ceaselessly. Marriage came later, but even then, family life was secondary to military duty. A Spartan mother, it was said, gave her son a shield with the words, "Return with it or on it." For in Sparta, honor was life, and death in battle was the noblest fate. Yet Spartan society was not only shaped by its men. Women, unlike in most of Greece, held a unique power. While men trained or fought, Spartan women managed estates, raised families, and maintained the economy. They were educated in fitness and discipline, believing strong mothers bore strong warriors. Their voices carried weight, and their independence was respected, a rarity in the ancient world. At the core of Spartan power was its dual kingship. Two kings ruled at once, one to lead armies, another to manage affairs at home. But their power was balanced by the Gerousia, the Council of Elders, and the Apella, the Assembly of Citizens. Though Sparta was not democratic like Athens, it was a system built on stability and shared duty. Yet beneath the strength of Sparta lay a hidden truth. The land was farmed not by the Spartans themselves, but by the Helots, a population of conquered people. The Helots worked the fields, providing food for their Spartan masters. But they lived in oppression, often outnumbering Spartans many times over. To control them, Sparta maintained a system of fear. Young men were sometimes ordered to hunt and kill Helots, ensuring the oppressed never rose against their rulers. Thus, Spartan freedom and military focus rested upon the labor and suffering of others. Despite this, the discipline of Sparta made it a force feared across Greece. Its warriors fought in tight phalanxes, shields locked, spears thrust forward. No army could match their training, their unity, or their willingness to die for their city. To face Sparta in battle was to face men who had known nothing but war since childhood. Their reputation reached its peak at Thermopylae, where a small Spartan force resisted the mighty Persian Empire. Though they fell, their courage inspired Greece and secured Sparta's legacy as the ultimate warrior state. Sparta was not a land of art, philosophy, or wealth. It was a society forged for war, preserved by fear and guided by discipline. Its simplicity was its strength, and its silence was its voice. For centuries, Greece would be shaped by the tension between Athens and Sparta, one city of ideas, the other of warriors. If Sparta was the city of warriors, Athens was the city of ideas. Nestled by the sea, surrounded by fertile hills and the shining waters of the Aegean, Athens grew into a place unlike any other in Greece. Here, trade brought wealth, ships brought stories, and minds found the freedom to dream. While Sparta trained in silence, Athens buzzed with the sound of debate, poetry, and music. In the early days, Athens, like many Greek cities, was ruled by kings. But slowly, power shifted into the hands of noble families, and with that came both progress and conflict. The common people, farmers and craftsmen, often struggled under debt and inequality. Yet it was from these struggles that Athens would shape something the world had never seen before: democracy. One of the earliest reformers was Solon, a wise man who eased the burdens of debt and gave the people a voice. He laid the foundation for change, balancing power between the rich and the poor. Later, Cleisthenes, often called the father of democracy, went further. He broke the old system of clans and noble families, dividing the people into new groups based on where they lived, not who they were. This meant that citizenship, duty, and voice were shared more equally across society. Athens became a place where free men gathered in the assembly, raising their voices to decide the fate of their city. They debated laws, voted on war and peace, and held leaders accountable. For the first time in history, Ordinary people, not just kings or nobles, guided the destiny of a state. It was not perfect, for women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded. But the idea, the seed of democracy, had been planted, and it would echo across centuries. Athens was not only about politics, it was about culture, philosophy, and art. Theaters filled with plays of tragedy and comedy, where stories of gods and men unfolded beneath the open sky. Philosophers walked the streets, asking questions that challenged the very nature of life, justice, and truth. Poets recited verses, sculptors carved marble into lifelike beauty, and architects designed temples that touched the heavens. Among them stood the Acropolis, crowned by the Parthenon, a symbol of Athens' devotion to wisdom and the goddess Athena. The sea was Athens' lifeline, its navy, its shield and sword. Ships called triremes, sleek and swift, carried Athenian power across the Aegean. This maritime strength allowed Athens to trade, to expand, and to defend itself from threats abroad. Yet it also made Athens ambitious, eager to lead, to dominate, and to shape Greece under its vision. For Athens, freedom of thought was as important as freedom of arms. Its citizens saw themselves not just as warriors or workers, but as participants in something larger, a shared destiny. This was the spirit of Athens: debate in the assembly, drama in the theater, wisdom in the marketplace, and courage upon the sea. But with its rise came rivalry. For across the land, Sparta watched Athens with suspicion. Two visions of life now stood face to face: discipline against debate, silence against speech, spear against voice. This tension would one day ignite into war. Yet for now, Athens shone brightly, the cradle of democracy, the heart of philosophy, and the stage where history's greatest ideas were born. And though empires would fall and centuries would pass, the echo of Athens, the voice of its people, would never be silenced. Far to the east, beyond the mountains and across vast lands, rose the mighty Persian Empire. It was the largest empire the world had ever known, stretching from the valleys of Egypt to the mountains of India. Its kings commanded armies counted not in thousands, but in hundreds of thousands. Gold flowed through its palaces, and countless nations bowed to its rule. And yet, on the small rocky shores of Greece, a challenge was rising. Tiny city-states, divided by rivalry, stood in the path of this great empire. The Persians saw Greece as little more than a stone in their sandal, something to be crushed easily. But the Greeks, fiercely protective of their freedom, thought otherwise. The first clash came when the Persian king Darius sent his armies across the sea. They landed upon the plains of Marathon, facing the Athenians. The Persians outnumbered them greatly, but the Athenians fought with determination and cunning. They charged swiftly, their hoplite shields locking, their spears piercing the Persian lines. Against all odds, the Persians were driven back to their ships. The victory at Marathon was more than a battle. It was a message. Greece would not kneel so easily. Years later, Darius's son Xerxes sought revenge. He gathered an army so vast that, as legends tell, it drank rivers dry. With bridges built across seas and ships covering the horizon, Xerxes marched toward Greece. At the narrow pass of Thermopylae, a small band of Greeks, led by King Leonidas of Sparta, made their stand. For days, they held the mountain pass, their courage inspiring all of Greece. Though they fell at last, their sacrifice bought time for the cities to prepare. The war was not only fought on land, but also upon the sea. At Salamis, the cunning Athenians lured the massive Persian fleet into narrow waters. There, the smaller, swifter Greek ships struck with precision, breaking the pride of Persia's navy. Defeated at sea and slowed on land, the great invasion began to falter. Finally, at Plataea, the Greeks gathered together, Spartans, Athenians, and others united. They fought with fierce determination, and the Persian army was crushed. The greatest empire of the world had been turned back by the free cities of Greece. The wars had shown that unity, even among rivals, could bring victory against overwhelming odds. Greece had defended not only its land, but its way of life, its freedom, its voice, its spirit. From Marathon to Salamis, from Thermopylae to Plataea, legends were born that would live forever. The Persians remained powerful, but they would never again threaten Greece in such a way. For the Greeks, these wars became a story of courage, sacrifice, and the triumph of the few against the many. And as the smoke of battle faded, Athens began to rise, stepping into a golden age that would shape the world. The wars against Persia had ended, and Greece stood free. Among all the cities, Athens rose the highest, shining like a jewel by the sea. Its walls were tall, its ships swift, its people proud of their freedom. Athens had become not just a city, but the heart of an idea that citizens could rule themselves, an idea that every free man could raise his voice in the assembly. This was democracy, still young, still fragile, but alive. And at the center of this rising power stood a man named Pericles. Pericles was no ordinary leader. He spoke with wisdom, thought with clarity, and dreamed with vision. The people of Athens trusted him, for he sought not his own glory, but the greatness of the city. He guided Athens into what would be called its golden age. The streets of Athens bustled with life, markets filled with goods from across the seas. Ships brought grain from Egypt, silver from the mines, and treasures from distant lands. Artists, thinkers, and poets gathered in the city, each adding to its growing brilliance. Athens was not just a place of warriors anymore, but of ideas. It became the school of Greece, and later, the school of the world. Under Pericles, Athens built monuments that would last through centuries. The greatest of these was the Parthenon, a temple to the goddess Athena. High upon the Acropolis, the Parthenon rose like a crown of marble. Its columns were tall and perfect, its carvings detailed with stories of gods and heroes. Inside stood a statue of Athena, gleaming with gold and ivory, a symbol of the city's pride. To build such wonders took wealth, and Athens drew it from its empire. The city had formed the Delian League, an alliance of Greek states meant to defend against Persia. But under Pericles, Athens turned it into something more. The League's treasury, once kept on the island of Delos, was moved to Athens itself. With that wealth, Athens built ships, temples, and theaters. And while some allies grumbled, Athens grew ever stronger. The theaters of Athens filled with the voices of playwrights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Their dramas explored fate, justice, and the struggles of human life. Philosophers walked its streets, questioning the nature of truth, virtue, and the soul. Sculptors carved lifelike statues, capturing both beauty and strength. Historians began to write, recording events so that future generations might learn. The Golden Age was more than wealth, more than power. It was an age of ideas, of art, of human imagination set free. Pericles believed that Athens was not just a city for its people, but a beacon for all of Greece. He once declared, "Our city is an education to Hellas." And indeed, Athens inspired others, even those who envied her greatness. But shadows lingered on the horizon. Sparta, proud and strong, looked with suspicion at Athens's rising power. The balance of Greece was fragile, and rivalry between city-states was growing. Yet for a time, Athens stood at its height, unmatched in brilliance. Its Parthenon gleamed in the sunlight. Its theaters echoed with laughter and sorrow. Its people lived with the belief that they were part of something eternal. The Golden Age of Athens was a moment in history where art, democracy, and culture shone brighter than ever before. And though wars would come and glory would fade, the legacy of this age would endure forever. For even as centuries passed, the Parthenon still stood, a silent witness to the greatness of Pericles' vision. And Athens, though scarred by time, would always be remembered as the cradle of democracy and the light of the ancient world. Athens had risen in glory, its temples shining, its theaters alive, its empire vast. But beyond the marble and the monuments, something deeper was happening. In the minds of men, a quiet revolution had begun. A revolution not of swords and shields, but of thought. This was the age of Greek philosophy. It was a search for wisdom, for meaning, for truth itself. And in this search, Three names would echo through all of history: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. They were not kings, not warriors, not rulers of armies. Yet, they conquered something greater: the human mind. Their ideas would shape the world for thousands of years to come. Socrates was the first, a man of humble birth who walked the streets of Athens. He wore no fine clothes, carried no wealth, and held no office. Instead, he asked questions that pierced like arrows. What is justice? What is virtue? What is the good life? He believed that wisdom began with admitting one's own ignorance. And so he asked again and again until his students were forced to think, to doubt, to reflect. Many found him annoying. Some found him dangerous. But to the young, to those hungry for truth, he was a guide like no other. He never wrote down his teachings. His wisdom lived in the conversations he shared, in the dialogues of the city. Among those who listened was a man named Plato. Plato was born into nobility, yet found his true calling in philosophy. He was deeply moved by Socrates, especially when Athens condemned his teacher to death. Socrates had been accused of corrupting the youth and dishonoring the gods. But in truth, he was executed for daring to challenge power with truth. Plato watched as his master drank the poison hemlock, calm and unafraid. It left a mark on his soul forever. Determined to preserve Socrates' wisdom, Plato began to write. Through his dialogues, Socrates lived again, questioning, challenging, inspiring. But Plato added his own vision. He believed that behind the world of appearances lay a higher reality, the world of forms. Beauty, justice, goodness, these were not just fleeting things, but eternal truths. To seek philosophy, Plato said, was to turn away from shadows and face the light of truth. He founded the Academy, one of the first great schools of philosophy. Students gathered there to debate, to learn, to train their minds. And from that academy would emerge the next giant of thought, Aristotle. Aristotle was different from his teacher. Where Plato dreamed of eternal forms, Aristotle studied the world as it was. He observed, he categorized, he searched for patterns in nature, in politics, in life itself. To Aristotle, knowledge was not only in the heavens, but also in the earth beneath our feet. He studied plants and animals. He wrote about ethics, logic, and the nature of happiness. He examined governments, asking which systems led to justice and stability. To him, philosophy was not a distant dream, but a tool for living well. He believed that the purpose of life was to seek eudaimonia, a deep and lasting happiness found in virtue and reason. Aristotle's influence reached far beyond Athens. He became the tutor of Alexander the Great, shaping the mind of a conqueror who would spread Greek culture across the world. Thus, from Socrates to Plato to Aristotle, a chain of wisdom was formed. Socrates taught the value of questioning. Plato revealed the vision of higher truths. Aristotle grounded wisdom in the study of life itself. Together, they built the foundation of Western thought. Their ideas traveled through centuries, copied in books, debated in monasteries, rediscovered in the Renaissance, and studied even today. Every time we ask what is true, what is good, what is just, we walk in their footsteps. Athens may have crumbled, its empire may have faded, but its philosophers gave it immortality. For long after the stones of the Parthenon cracked, the words of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle continued to shine. They lit a flame of wisdom that has never gone out. And so, the golden age of Athens was not only an age of temples and art, but also an age of thought. A time when men dared to ask the deepest questions, and in doing so, gave the world a gift greater than marble or gold. The gift of philosophy. As Athens grew in wealth and power, it also became the beating heart of culture. Its temples rose to the sky, but so too did its stories rise to the hearts of men. For the Greeks believed that life was not only lived, but also told. They believed that in poetry, in drama, in literature, the soul of a people could be heard. And so the stage became sacred. The theater was not merely a place of entertainment. It was a place where gods and mortals spoke, where myths came alive, where truth was revealed. In the shadow of the Acropolis stood the great theater of Dionysus. It could hold thousands, its stone seats curving around the stage like waves of an eternal sea. There, under the open sky, the people of Athens gathered. Rich and poor alike, united by story. Plays were performed not for profit, but as offerings to Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and transformation. To watch a play was a ritual, an act of shared memory, an exploration of fate and freedom. Greek drama was born in two great forms, tragedy and comedy. Tragedy told of human struggle against destiny, of the fragility of life, of the fall of heroes. Comedy, in contrast, mocked the powerful, laughed at foolishness, and reminded the people not to take themselves too seriously. Together, they captured the fullness of human existence, joy and sorrow, laughter and tears, hope and despair. The great tragedians walked this sacred path. Aeschylus, the father of tragedy, whose plays thundered with themes of justice and divine will. He wrote of kings and curses, of the blood that flows when vengeance is unending. His Oresteia trilogy spoke of a world moving from chaos to law, from revenge to justice. Then came Sophocles, whose pen carved the tragedy of Oedipus. He showed how even the noblest man could fall, trapped not by evil, but by fate itself. His Antigone gave voice to resistance, the courage of a single woman against the will of a king. Through Sophocles, the audience learned that human choice mattered, even in the face of destiny. Euripides followed, the most daring of them all. He stripped the gods of their grandeur and revealed them as flawed, capricious, even cruel. His plays spoke of women, of outsiders, of those forgotten by power. In his words, the pain of the oppressed found expression. He was both loved and hated, for he forced Athens to see truths it often wished to hide. And then, in laughter, came the voices of comedy. Aristophanes, with his sharp wit, mocked generals, politicians, even the philosophers themselves. In his play, The Clouds, he ridiculed Socrates. In Lysistrata, he imagined women ending war by refusing their husbands. Through humor, he gave the people power to question authority, to laugh at corruption, to hold up a mirror to society. But drama was only one voice of Greek literature. Long before the stage, the poet Homer had sung of heroes. The Iliad and the Odyssey were not written at first, but carried in memory, spoken by bards, passed down through centuries. They told of Achilles' rage, of Hector's honor, of Odysseus's endless journey home. In their verses, the Greeks found both their past and their ideals. Later, Hesiod spoke of the gods and the ages of man, while Pindar celebrated the victories of athletes in song. Poetry was woven into every festival, every gathering, every remembrance. For the Greeks knew that words were more than sounds. They were bridges to memory, to meaning, to the eternal. Greek drama and literature gave voice to the soul of a people. They asked the great questions: what is justice? What is fate? What is laughter? What is love? And in answering, they created works that would never die. For though the theaters have crumbled, though the poets lie in dust, their voices remain. Still they speak, across time, across silence, to every ear that listens. Still they remind us that humanity is a story, and that story is worth telling. The Greek world, for all its brilliance, was never truly united. Athens stood proud, a beacon of democracy, wealth, and culture. Sparta stood firm, a citadel of discipline, strength, and unyielding order. For decades, the two powers lived in uneasy balance, each wary of the other. But pride is a dangerous fire, and ambition, once lit, rarely fades. The Peloponnesian War began not in sudden rage, but in slow tension. Athens, through its empire, controlled the seas. Its navy was unmatched, its trade routes secure, its coffers full. Sparta, through its allies, ruled the land. Its warriors were unmatched, its discipline unbroken, its pride unshaken. When small conflicts flared among their allies, Athens and Sparta were drawn in. Soon the whole of Greece was at war with itself. Thucydides, the great historian, would later write of this struggle. He called it a war unlike any other, fought not just for land, but for supremacy itself. It was, he said, a tragedy born of fear, Sparta's fear of Athens' rising power. Fear drove them to war, and war drove Greece into darkness. In the early years, Athens seemed strong. Behind its walls, the city could withstand siege, while its navy struck at Spartan coasts. But strength turned to weakness when a plague swept through the city. The disease took thousands of lives, sparing neither rich nor poor. Even Pericles, the great leader of Athens, was lost. The city, once confident, now stumbled in despair. Yet Athens fought on. Its ships sailed across the Aegean, carrying its power far beyond Greece. It dreamed of empire, of dominance, of bending the world to its will. But ambition is a heavy burden. When Athens launched its grand Sicilian expedition, sending fleets and men to conquer distant lands, it was a gamble too great. The expedition ended in disaster. Ships burned, soldiers captured, dreams shattered. Athens, once shining, was brought to the edge of ruin. Sparta, with Persian gold, built a navy to rival Athens. Battle by battle, city by city, the balance shifted. Athens, weakened by loss, fractured by political strife, struggled to hold on. Its allies broke away, its walls trembled, its spirit faded. And at last, in 404 BCE, Athens surrendered. The proud city, cradle of democracy, humbled before Sparta's might. But Sparta's victory was not peace. For though Athens had fallen, the wounds of war scarred all of Greece. Cities lay in ruins, trust lay broken, hope lay dim. The golden age was over. What remained was suspicion, weakness, and division. The Peloponnesian War taught Greece a bitter lesson. That greatness, when turned against itself, becomes destruction. That pride, unchecked, devours even the strongest. And that in the end, there are no true victors in civil war, only survivors. Yet even in the ashes, voices remained. Thucydides wrote not to glorify, but to warn. He showed that war is born of fear, of power, of pride. And his words echo still, whispering through time, reminding us of the fragility of peace. For in the war of Athens and Sparta, the world saw both brilliance and folly. And in its memory we are asked, will we too fall to fear, or will we learn to rise above it? When Athens fell and Sparta stood as victor, the balance of Greece seemed decided. Sparta, stern and proud, claimed to lead the Greek world. But victory in war does not always bring peace nor lasting strength. For beneath Sparta's triumph, unrest grew. Its harsh rule bred resentment, its rigid ways brought strain. And soon, another city would rise to challenge its power. That city was Thebes. Long overshadowed by Athens and Sparta, Thebes had waited in silence. Its people, hardened by struggle, watched the great powers clash. And when the moment came, they stepped forward into history. The shifting tide began with allies breaking away. Sparta's empire, built on discipline, began to crack. The harsh weight of control turned friends into rivals and rivals into enemies. Thebes, standing at the center of Greece, seized the chance. It declared itself free from Spartan dominance. And others, weary of Sparta's rule, followed. Conflict erupted once again. The Thebans, fierce and determined, marched into war. At the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, they faced the Spartans directly. For centuries, Sparta's warriors had been unmatched. But this day would change all. Under the command of Epaminondas, the Thebans used a bold new strategy. They struck with depth, with power, with unity. The Spartan phalanx, long believed unbreakable, was shattered. Sparta, for the first time, tasted defeat in open battle. Its myth of invincibility was broken. Thebes now stood as the leading power of Greece. For a brief time, it carried the torch of dominance. Epaminondas, wise and daring, reshaped the land. He freed Messenia, long enslaved by Sparta. He sought to build a balance, a Greece not ruled by one, but shared among many. But power is fragile, and time is short. Thebes, though strong, could not hold its place for long. Wars drained its strength, struggles drained its unity. And as swiftly as it rose, Thebes began to fade. Yet the rise of Thebes changed the story of Greece. It proved that no power, however mighty, lasts forever. It showed that courage and vision could overturn centuries of fear. And it left Greece divided once more, weakened and uncertain. For in the shifting power of Athens, Sparta, and Thebes, the Greek world spent its strength. And beyond its borders, a new force was watching. Macedon, waiting in the north, preparing to rise. In the north of Greece, beyond the proud cities of Athens, Sparta, and Thebes, lay Macedon. For centuries, it had been seen as a land of rough warriors, less refined than the Greeks of the south. Its kings claimed descent from Heracles, yet their power was fragile, their borders threatened. But in the mid-4th century BCE, a man arose who would change all of that. His name was Philip II. Philip came to power in a time of danger. Macedon was weak, surrounded by enemies, and torn by rivalries. But Philip was no ordinary ruler. He was a soldier, a diplomat, and above all, a visionary. He began by reshaping the army. Philip introduced the Macedonian phalanx. Rows upon rows of disciplined soldiers carried long spears, the sarissa. Together, they formed a wall of steel, moving as one. It was a weapon of unity, strength, and precision. No Greek army had ever seen its like. But Philip's genius was not only in war. He used marriage alliances to strengthen his rule. He used diplomacy to turn enemies into allies. He spread Macedon's influence not just by the sword, but by the art of persuasion. Soon, the scattered tribes and cities of Macedon were united under his command. Yet Philip's ambitions did not stop at the borders of his homeland. He looked south toward Greece. The city-states there were weary from endless wars. Athens, Sparta, Thebes, all had fought each other, and none had gained lasting peace. To Philip, this division was an opportunity. Slowly, step by step, he moved into Greek affairs. He offered protection, then demanded loyalty. He fought battles, made treaties, and played rivals against one another. In time, his influence spread through all of Greece. The turning point came at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE. There, Philip faced the combined forces of Athens and Thebes. The Macedonian phalanx advanced with crushing power. And fighting at Philip's side was his young son, Alexander. The Greeks were defeated, their unity broken. Macedon now stood as master of Greece. But Philip's dream was greater still. He planned to lead the Greeks into a grand campaign against Persia, the empire that once invaded their land. For Philip, this would be the crowning achievement, revenge for the Persian wars, and glory for all Greece. Yet destiny took a sudden turn. In 336 BCE, Philip was struck down by an assassin's blade. The great king, who had united Macedon and conquered Greece, was gone. But his legacy did not die with him. For in his place stood a son, young yet extraordinary, a son who would take Philip's vision and carry it beyond imagination, a son whose name would echo across the ages, Alexander the Great. When Philip II fell to an assassin's blade, his son Alexander was only 20 years old. The world doubted him. Could one so young carry the weight of Macedon and the destiny his father had left behind? But Alexander was no ordinary youth. From childhood, he had been trained for greatness. His mother, Olympias, filled him with visions of divine purpose. She told him he was descended from Achilles, the hero of Troy. His tutor, the great philosopher Aristotle, shaped his mind with knowledge of philosophy, science, and politics. And from his father, he inherited the arts of war and command. All of Greece watched as this young man took the throne. At first, many thought Macedon would crumble. Rebellions stirred in the north. Cities in Greece tested his resolve. But Alexander moved swiftly, with fire in his spirit. He crushed uprisings, subdued rivals, and showed Greece that a new king stood strong. Yet Alexander's dreams reached far beyond Greece. From his earliest years, he had listened to tales of Persia. The empire of Darius III stretched across the east, vast and wealthy, yet vulnerable. Persia was the old enemy, the power his father had longed to conquer. Alexander made that dream his own. He prepared his army with discipline and care. The Macedonian phalanx drilled to perfection. The companion cavalry loyal and swift. Engineers, scouts, and soldiers from every corner of Greece joined his cause. It was not just a Macedonian army, it was an army of Greece, united under his command. Before leaving, Alexander made offerings to the gods. At Troy, he honored Achilles, laying a wreath upon his tomb. He prayed not only for victory, but for everlasting glory. For Alexander, conquest was not merely about land, it was about immortality. He sought a place among the legends, to stand beside Achilles and Heracles. And so, in the spring of 334 BCE, he crossed the Hellespont. From Europe to Asia, from Greece to Persia. With each step, the dream of conquest grew larger. The first battles lay ahead. Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela, names that would one day echo through history. But in this moment, Alexander's heart was filled with fire and destiny. He was no longer just the son of Philip. He was a leader chosen by fate. A man who carried Greece upon his shoulders. A king whose dream was not only to conquer the world, but to reshape it forever. The story of Alexander the Great had only just begun. In the year 323 BCE, Alexander the Great stood at the height of his power. He had marched from Greece to the far reaches of India. He had defeated mighty kings, crossed deserts, and built cities that bore his name. But even the greatest conqueror is still mortal. When he returned to Babylon, the heart of his new empire, he was weary. His soldiers longed for rest. The endless campaigns had taken their toll. Yet Alexander still dreamed of greater conquests. He spoke of Arabia, of new lands to explore, of oceans yet to be sailed. But fate had other plans. In Babylon, a fever took hold of him. Some said it was malaria, others poison. Day by day, his strength faded. The man who had never lost a battle now lay helpless upon his bed. His generals gathered around him, waiting for his command. "Who shall inherit your empire?" they asked. Alexander, his voice weak, is said to have whispered, "To the strongest." And with those words, the fate of his empire was sealed. In June of 323 BCE, at only 32 years old, Alexander the Great died. His empire stretched from Greece to India, yet no clear heir remained. The dream of unity that he had carried dissolved in an instant. His generals, known as the Diadochi, the successors, turned from loyal companions into rivals. They divided the empire like hunters dividing prey. Ptolemy took Egypt, founding a dynasty that would rule for centuries. Seleucus gained the vast lands of Persia and the East. Antigonus and his descendants fought for power in Macedon and Greece. The empire that had once been whole now broke into pieces. The vision of Alexander lived on in memory, in legend, in the cities that bore his name. But his empire, his dream of one world under one ruler, died with him. And so, the greatest conqueror of the ancient world passed into history. His name eternal, his deeds unforgettable, but his empire forever divided. When Alexander the Great died in Babylon in 323 BCE, the world seemed to hold its breath. The mighty empire he had built stretched across 3 continents. Yet with no clear heir, the empire was left vulnerable. His generals, once brothers in arms, now became rivals. They are remembered as the Diadochi, the successors. The dream of one united empire quickly dissolved. Instead, the vast lands were divided into separate kingdoms. Each general carved out his own realm, seeking to build his own dynasty. It was the beginning of the Hellenistic Age, a new chapter in history. In Egypt, Ptolemy claimed power. He established the Ptolemaic dynasty, which would endure for nearly 3 centuries. Under his rule, Alexandria became a shining jewel of the Mediterranean. The great library of Alexandria rose, filled with scrolls and knowledge from every corner of the known world. Philosophers, mathematicians, and poets gathered there, making the city a beacon of wisdom. In the vast lands of the East, Seleucus took control. His empire, known as the Seleucid Kingdom, stretched from Persia to parts of India. It was a land of diversity, blending Greek and Eastern traditions. Cities were founded, markets thrived, and cultures intermingled in ways never seen before. But ruling such vast and scattered territories was never easy. The Seleucid rulers often faced revolts, invasions, and internal strife. In Macedon and Greece, Antigonus and his descendants fought for dominance. The Antigonid dynasty eventually rose to power, holding the heartland of Alexander's homeland. Their rule was marked by constant wars with neighboring powers. Yet they too carried forward the legacy of blending Greek culture with the lands they ruled. The kingdoms that rose from Alexander's broken empire did not merely preserve Greek culture, they transformed it. This was the essence of the Hellenistic age. Greek language, art, and philosophy spread far beyond the borders of Greece itself. Sculptures became more lifelike, expressing human emotion and drama. Theater flourished, and literature explored new themes of fate, love, and human struggle. In science and mathematics, the Hellenistic world reached astonishing heights. Euclid in Alexandria wrote his Elements, laying the foundations of geometry. Archimedes in Syracuse discovered principles that would shape engineering for centuries. Astronomers like Aristarchus suggested that the Earth revolved around the Sun long before it was widely accepted. The thirst for knowledge seemed unending. Religion, too, began to change. Greek gods were worshipped alongside local deities, blending faiths into new forms of spirituality. Mystery cults grew, offering personal salvation and hope beyond this life. The old boundaries between cultures began to blur. Yet the Hellenistic kingdoms were never entirely stable. They were powerful, wealthy, and culturally vibrant, but also fragile. Rivalries between dynasties often erupted into wars. New enemies, such as the rising power of Rome, loomed on the horizon. The legacy of Alexander's empire lived on, but its future was uncertain. The Hellenistic age was both a continuation and a transformation. It carried forward the spirit of Alexander, spreading Greek culture across the known world. But it also created something new, a fusion of East and West, a world of diversity and exchange. It was an age of learning, beauty, and ambition, but also of fragile kingdoms and endless conflict. From the shining halls of Alexandria to the bustling markets of Antioch, from the temples of Greece to the desert of Persia, the world had been forever changed. This was the world after Alexander, the world of the Hellenistic kingdoms. The Hellenistic age was not only an era of kings and battles. It was also an age of learning, discovery, and knowledge. The Greeks, building on traditions from Egypt and Mesopotamia, pushed human understanding to new heights. Their discoveries became gifts that the world would treasure for centuries. In the shining city of Alexandria, the famous library stood as a beacon of wisdom. Scholars from many lands gathered there, bringing scrolls of history, poetry, mathematics, and science. The air was filled with the quiet rustle of parchment and the whispers of inquiry. It was a sanctuary of knowledge, where the curious could explore the mysteries of the universe. Mathematics became a language of truth and beauty. Euclid, known as the father of geometry, wrote his Elements. This work organized mathematical principles with such clarity that it remained the standard textbook for over 2,000 years. With straight lines, circles, and triangles, Euclid revealed the hidden order of the world. In the fields of numbers and calculation, Archimedes shined with brilliance. He discovered laws of levers, pulleys, and buoyancy. His mind was so sharp that he once said, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the earth." His inventions, war machines, water screws, and ingenious devices were centuries ahead of their time. Astronomy, too, flourished in this golden age of thought. Aristarchus of Samos looked to the heavens and suggested a daring idea. He proposed that the earth moved around the sun, a truth that would not be widely accepted until thousands of years later. Though his vision was bold, it showed the courage of Greek science to question the world. In medicine, Hippocrates laid the foundation for healing as a science. Doctors no longer saw illness as a curse of the gods, but as a natural process. Careful observation, diagnosis, and treatment became the new path of medicine. The Hippocratic Oath, sworn by physicians, still echoes in the halls of modern hospitals. Geography also advanced through the work of Eratosthenes. He calculated the circumference of the earth with astonishing accuracy using only shadows, sticks, and logic. He mapped lands and seas, guiding travelers and explorers for centuries to come. Knowledge, once scattered, was being gathered into a global vision. Philosophy, science, and art blended together in this search for truth. The Greeks did not separate wisdom into boxes. They saw it as one great journey. From the movement of the stars to the beating of the human heart, all knowledge was connected. This spirit of inquiry became their greatest legacy. Though empires rose and fell, the discoveries of Greek thinkers endured. They were translated, preserved, and carried into new civilizations: Rome, the Islamic Golden Age, and later into Renaissance Europe. Every age that followed was touched by the brilliance of Greek science and learning. It was truly a gift to the world, a treasure beyond gold or empire. And so, as the night deepens, we remember that knowledge is a flame. Once lit in the minds of the Greeks, it has never been extinguished. It still burns today, guiding us through the darkness, offering us wisdom and light. In the world of the ancient Greeks, the gods were never distant. They were not hidden in unreachable heavens, but lived close to the hearts of mortals. Every mountain, river, and grove carried the presence of a divine being. Religion was not an abstract belief. It was a living connection between humanity and the sacred. The Olympian gods ruled from high upon Mount Olympus. Zeus, the father of gods and men, wielded his thunderbolt as a symbol of power and justice. Beside him stood Hera, queen of the heavens, watching over marriage and family. Athena brought wisdom and strategy, guiding cities like Athens with reason and strength. Apollo, radiant with light, was the patron of music, prophecy, and healing. And Artemis, his twin, wandered the forests as protector of the hunt and the wild. Yet the Greeks knew that gods were not distant ideals. They imagined them walking among mortals, taking human form, testing the hearts of men and women. A guest at the door could be Zeus in disguise. A beggar on the street could be Hermes, swift messenger of the gods. This belief gave rise to a deep sense of hospitality, known as xenia, where every stranger might carry divine presence. The stories of mythology painted the gods with both glory and flaw. They loved, they quarreled, they fought, and they forgave. Through these tales, the Greeks saw their own human struggles reflected in divine form. Gods were not perfect. They were mirrors of humanity, elevated to eternal power. Festivals honored these gods in vibrant celebration. At Olympia, the games were held in tribute to Zeus, where athletes tested their strength for eternal glory. In Athens, the Panathenaic festival praised Athena with music, poetry, and procession. The theater, too, was a sacred act. Tragedies and comedies performed in honor of Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy. Religion, art, and daily life were woven together like threads of the same fabric. Oracles held a special place in Greek belief. At Delphi, the priestess of Apollo, known as the Pythia, delivered cryptic prophecies. Kings, generals, and common people alike sought guidance from her words. The oracle's voice was thought to be the voice of the god himself, speaking through the mists of mystery. The underworld, too, was part of this sacred vision. Hades ruled in shadows, yet he was not cruel. He was simply the keeper of order after death. Persephone, his queen, symbolized the eternal cycle of life and rebirth, returning each spring to bring new growth to the world above. Through myth, the Greeks found meaning in both life and death. Religion was not confined to temples alone. It was present in every oath, every meal, every prayer whispered before a journey. The gods were companions, protectors, and sometimes rivals. They were both near and far, eternal and immediate. And so, Greek religion and mythology created a universe where the sacred and the human touched. It was a world filled with beauty, mystery, and awe. A world where gods walked among mortals, shaping destiny with unseen hands. And though centuries have passed, their stories still echo, reminders of an age when every stone and star was alive with divine presence. In the sunlit valleys and along the shores of the Aegean Sea, daily life in ancient Greece unfolded with rhythm and tradition. The Greeks lived close to nature, their villages surrounded by olive trees, vineyards, and fields of grain. Life was simple, yet filled with beauty, order, and meaning. For men, daily duties often included farming, trading, or working in craft and politics. Farmers rose with the dawn, guiding plows across the soil, while merchants sailed the seas, carrying goods from one port to another. In the city, men gathered in the agora, the public square, where they discussed business, philosophy, and the affairs of the state. It was here that voices of democracy were heard, as citizens debated and shaped the destiny of their city. Women's lives were centered in the home. They cared for children, managed the household, and spun wool into cloth. Though less visible in public life, women were the heart of the family, guarding traditions and passing them to the next generation. Festivals, however, opened doors where women played key roles in religious rituals and processions, honoring the gods. Children, full of laughter and energy, learned through play and education. Boys were taught reading, writing, music, and physical training, preparing them for citizenship and defense of their city. In Sparta, their training was stricter, focused on discipline, endurance, and loyalty to the state. Girls, too, learned the skills of household management, but in Sparta, they were also trained in strength and fitness. Meals brought families together. Bread, olives, cheese, figs, and fish from the sea were common on the table. Wine, diluted with water, was enjoyed as a daily drink. At symposia, banquets for men, conversations flowed with music, poetry, and philosophical thought, creating moments of both joy and reflection. Homes in ancient Greece were modest, built from stone or clay, with simple courtyards where families gathered. The hearth fire was sacred, a symbol of warmth and protection, watched over by Hestia, goddess of the home. Temples and theaters stood as grand spaces of community, but the humble household was where the spirit of Greek life was most deeply felt. Festivals filled the calendar with color and joy. The Olympic Games united city-states in peaceful competition. Religious feasts honored gods with music, dance, and sacrifice. Daily life and sacred life were never far apart. They blended into one continuous rhythm of work, worship, and celebration. Though centuries have passed, the essence of daily Greek life still speaks to us. It was a world balanced between simplicity and greatness, between the duties of the day and the dreams of the eternal. And in their routines, whether in farm, market, or home, the Greeks laid the foundation of a civilization that still shapes our world today. As the centuries turned, the strength of Greece began to fade, while the power of Rome grew ever stronger. The city-states, once fierce and independent, had weakened through wars among themselves. Athens, Sparta, and Thebes no longer stood united. They were divided, vulnerable, and weary. Rome saw this weakness, and Rome was ready. At first, Rome came as an ally. Greek states looked to Roman arms for protection against enemies, including the rising kingdoms of Macedon. But slowly, Rome's hand grew heavier. Alliances turned into commands, and protection became control. The great battles came in the 2nd century BCE. In 197 BCE, at the Battle of Cynocephalae, Rome defeated Macedon, breaking its power. Soon after, Greece was declared free by Rome, but freedom was an illusion. The shadow of the Roman eagle already stretched across the land. The final blow came in 146 BCE at the Battle of Corinth. Roman legions crushed the Greek resistance. The proud city of Corinth was burned, its treasures taken, its people enslaved. Greece, once the teacher of the world, now bowed before Rome. Under Roman rule, Greece was not destroyed, but transformed. The Romans admired Greek culture deeply. They adopted Greek gods, Greek art, Greek philosophy, and even Greek architecture. Rome conquered Greece, but in spirit, Greece conquered Rome. Daily life changed. Greek cities became Roman provinces. Taxes were paid to Roman governors. Greek soldiers now marched under Roman banners. But theaters still echoed with drama, temples still rose toward the sky, and philosophers still spoke of wisdom in the marketplace. For the Greeks, pride and sorrow lived side by side. They had lost their freedom, yet their culture lived on, spreading through Rome to the wider world. The legacy of Homer, Socrates, and Pericles now found new life under Roman power. The Greek spirit, though conquered, refused to fade. Thus, Greece under Rome was a land both humbled and honored. Its armies had fallen, but its ideas had triumphed. Rome ruled the body, but Greece guided the mind. And together, they shaped the heart of Western civilization. The story of Greece does not end with conquest. Empires may rise and fall, but ideas, dreams, and wisdom live forever. Though Roman legions marched through her valleys, Greece's spirit remained unbroken. Her cities still whispered tales of glory, of gods and heroes, of freedom and courage. From the mountains of Sparta to the marble columns of Athens, the soul of Greece endured. Children still recited the words of Homer, the blind poet whose verses carried the heartbeat of a nation. In marketplaces, philosophers continued to ask questions of life, of virtue, of truth. In theaters, actors brought to life the tragedies and comedies of the past, teaching lessons that never grew old. Greek thought became the language of learning across the Mediterranean. Doctors studied the writings of Hippocrates, seeking cures for the body. Mathematicians turned to Pythagoras and Euclid, unlocking secrets of numbers and shapes. Historians followed Herodotus and Thucydides, learning how to record the truth of human events. The Greeks had given the world democracy, the belief that people could govern themselves. They had given the world philosophy, the courage to question even the deepest mysteries. They had given the world art, drama, and poetry, shaping imagination itself. And though their armies had fallen, these gifts remained eternal. Rome itself bowed before Greek wisdom. Roman generals read Greek plays. Roman emperors studied Greek philosophy. And Roman artists carved marble in the style of the great masters of Athens. Even as centuries passed, when Rome too began to crumble, Greece's light shone on. Through the Byzantine Empire, Greek language and tradition were preserved. Through scholars, monks, and travelers, Greek books were carried far and wide. The torch of knowledge passed from hand to hand, never extinguished. When Europe slept in the long night of the Dark Ages, Greek wisdom waited patiently. And when the Renaissance dawned, it was Greek thought that awakened the world once more. Artists studied ancient statues, scientists studied ancient texts, and poets echoed ancient voices. The rebirth of Europe was the rebirth of Greece itself. Today, the legacy of Greece lives in every democracy, in every classroom, in every theater, and in every library. It lives in the questions we ask, in the art we create, in the justice we seek, and in the truths we pursue. Whenever we speak of freedom, of knowledge, of beauty, Greece is there. Eternal, undying, and forever alive. So let us remember, empires fall, stones crumble, and kings are forgotten. But ideas endure. And the ideas born in ancient Greece still guide us, still inspire us, and still shine like stars in the night sky. This is the true story of Greece, her eternal gift to the world, the legacy that never dies.